what sparked my dehumanization, or what sparked all this was really just hearing about it and kind of experiencing it in Ranger Regiment. I call it brainwashing. I do believe there was brainwashing happening where we grew up, or where we grew up, and I didn't really reflect on it till after, but there's a moment in time where I definitely lost myself because of how much I dehumanized.
Now, I'm very excited to announce the first official sponsor of the Redacted Culture Cast. Obsidian Arms is one of those companies that reflects the many facets of gun culture. Not only are their firearms frequently found on competition fields like USPSA and 3-Gun, but they are a Minnesota-based, US-sourced original equipment manufacturer. Obsidian Arms makes their own punch and tool kits for the amateur and professional gunsmith out of Little Canada, Minnesota, that come with a lifetime warranty. Whether it is fine parts that require a Swiss machine, or you're in the design phase and are looking for an American machine shop that is in tune with the needs of gun culture, go check out Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com. Thank you, and now back to the show.
Forrest, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead and kick it off, John. What are we doing today?
We're going to be talking about dehumanization a little bit, and maybe a conversation I believe that more military and law enforcement can need to have when coming to the job, and kind of defining that, because I believe if you turn it on, you can turn it off. You know what I mean? So, but we need to recognize how to turn it on to turn it off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is going to be a classic conversation philosophy, so those who are not in the it's going to be definitions first. We're going to probably have to cover, what do you mean by dehumanization?
Yeah.
But I think as we get into it, my experience generally, just bird's eye view and my kind of angle that I've seen, and I don't think I'm necessarily unique on this one. I don't want to try to claim some sort of distinction there, but is that the dehumanization that we kind of see in film and video, or in this sort of cultural level of perceiving not the ruck marches, but your, what do you call the songs you sing while in formation, and
the cadences,
right? Yeah. I always took them as tongue-in-cheek, not as real, and then the reason why I'm bringing that up that way is because the thing that when people talk about dehumanization, I think it means something very different when you're in the conflict versus when you're just observing it. Mm-hmm. And I've actually witnessed and observed more factual dehumanization by people who don't really have skin in the game.
Gotcha.
So, whereas those who are on the cutting edge or in the battle, in fighting, in real combat, I honestly think that dehumanization makes people weak. Mm. So it makes you a worse soldier or a poorer warfighter for a number of reasons, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So.
Yeah. I think just so people watching know more, or context, right? I think that's the big thing here. If you want to give more of your introduction, not only in philosophy, but just being in Ranger Regiment and all that. You know what I mean? Maybe we're just so people know where we're coming from,
Yep. So, too long didn't read short history. I was in Ranger Battalion. I got into battalion in 2009, basically over the course of my 19th birthday. That was Cole Range.
Nice.
Yeah, you're like, oh, cool, I'm 19
time.
now. Go march 8 miles to go suffer. But so I got into battalion in 2009, immediately deployed mid-rotator into Iraq, and then stayed in battalion through 3 more deployments. So I had a total of 4 with them. This would be 375 down in Georgia. Very much so kind of heat of the GWAT era, especially as our attention, or at least, and I was a kid at the time, seeing how our attention was shifting away from Iraq and into Afghanistan. So I did most of my deployments there.
Oh, nice.
Yep. So I deploy. So as a Ranger, for those who are in kind of the military realm, a somewhat standard pathway through there for 1 full enlistment. I extended for my 4th deployment, and I ended up getting out as a team leader with my tab. So I came in as a rifleman, and then eventually became like a grenadier and a saw gunner, and I was in a Gustav team for a while in weapons squad. I'd spent a deployment in the Jock, just running JBV and figuring out that kind of side, which was it's like one of those like Jon Snow stories where like you hated being there, but it was actually really good for development. And then after that, after Ranger School, I ended up taking a team and becoming a team leader and deployed again to Afghanistan. But that time was also not really much of a combat deployment. It was much more of a advise and assist role. So, and then I got out of the Army in 2013. I think a decent amount of us did at that time. My thought, again, young, was maybe the grass is greener on the other side, but also burnout. And then we kind of thought the war was over. Turns out we were wrong. There was this whole thing called Syria, which I missed. But so I continued to stay active in that environment for a little bit, more adjacently. But then in 2015, I set all that aside to go to school, and I majored in philosophy and theology for with a focus on kind of like just war theory on one side, and then the moral implications of PTSD on the other.
Oh, interesting.
And so then I graduated that in 2018, kind of got depressed, and then figured it out, and we've just kind of been in this interesting road doing a number of things, whether it's through the podcast or working for publications or some less public activities. And so that's where I've been at now. Now, you might say, this is again for the context of the viewer. So my academic career, the intent has been to go on for like a master's, and perhaps go further into a PhD level if that's a possibility, if that's the way that the Lord determines. But the study of the material was like very, I don't want to say natural to me, but it was very welcomed. Like I do enjoy reading technical material on this kind of stuff, like whether it's Karl Popper or Thomas Kuhn or even Charles Taylor has become one of my favorite theologian philosophers of our time. So
nice. Did you go to school like for philosophy or?
Yes.
Okay.
So I did 2 majors and 2 minors. A major in philosophy, a major in theology, a minor in Greek. So for the New Testament, so that'd be Koine Greek, and then a minor in history, particularly focused on the French Revolution and that period of revolutions.
Gotcha. So, dang. There's so much to it. That's what I'm learning. There's just so much to
yeah. Well, I'm sure where you're at now, you're like that academic experience, like you think, oh, I'm going to go study a subject, and then you realize there's so much material to read on it that you have to like start cutting out sections.
Yes.
And that can become extremely frustrating. You're like, I want to read all of it, but I don't have the time or the bandwidth to do that.
Yeah. So. You know what sparked my dehumanization, like, or what sparked all this was really just hearing about it and kind of experiencing it in Ranger Regiment. You know, I call it brainwashing. I do believe there was brainwashing happening where we grew up, or where we grew up, and I didn't really reflect on it till after, but there was a moment in time where I definitely lost myself because of how much I dehumanized. One particular instance on deployment, you just get so bloodthirsty, just being trained, right? Like we are trained to go and do direct action, which meaning like go kick in doors, close it and kill the enemy. And when you don't get to, that's where it's like, you start getting like hungry for it, just so hungry for it. And there was an instance in Syria where, pointing a gun at these kids. And I remember this is where it screwed me up. Just because war was happening all around me and I felt like I haven't got my lick in. And I remember pointing a gun at these kids and taking the safety off, putting my trigger finger on the trigger. And I remember that time praying to God to commit evil. And
just give me my chance.
Yeah, just like, let's have like something, give me an excuse to kill these kids. And, it stuck with me for a long time. With dehumanization, like going that far to that extent to potentially kill like pure innocence, like those kids just wanted water. But to me, like I wanted to just one excuse. I describe it like as like, I don't know if you've seen Doctor Strange.
Not really.
There's like a moment, during the Avengers Endgame where he's like seeing all the scenarios possible. He's like, there's only one scenario. Well, in that moment when I was pointing my gun at him, I saw like I was just wanting that one scenario to happen, or I saw all these scenarios in my head that like give me like I just visualized everything in that moment to kill those kids. And it made me realize that I can dehumanize people. Like no one like we wouldn't fall victim to it or whatever, but everyone can be a victim to dehumanization. You know what I mean? So
when you say, let's go start diving a little bit into what we want to use as our definition for dehumanization in this course.
Yeah. I have one right here. So the dehumanization. Hold on, sorry, my book. So this guy named David Smith spent 20 years studying dehumanization, everything from like the genocide to like why we do it, you know what I mean?
Okay.
All that. And his definition on dehumanization is the attitude of conceiving of others as less than human creatures.
Okay.
So I really liked it in the sense of the attitude, meaning it's psychological, and then creatures, they're not animals. Like creatures meaning like monstrous and like life unworthy of life.
Sure.
So that's his definition. I really ran with it. And I look at it like in dehumanizing in general, just taking away the human element out of being human. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like, I think we're going to need to go into addressing the question of like what is human. But and I mean, this is again, I'm not really original in this one. It's just kind of this is how it works. That's one of the reasons why I've really enjoyed philosophy, is because you have like a mechanism by which to start breaking down and parsing an idea, and then determine where the premises are and where they may be incorrect or something like that. Yeah. And so starting with dehumanization, we kind of have to come from, I think I see two angles at which that it's approached, and one of them is a little bit more of a loose definition, which is some sort of animosity towards someone or justification for your own animosity towards someone on the basis of them being less worthy or less of. And that makes a very sharp departure from, say, justice. And yet we look at film and we look at movies and video games and stories, and like the vengeance story is so common. Yeah. That you take like even something as simple as like the first John Wick movie, like the bad guys not only killed his dog, but they like deeply offended this man by trashing his house and creating all these other problems, stealing his car. But at the same time, you might ask the question of like, was he justified in going on a rampage and essentially like killing hundreds of people? And we, through the convenience of the story, view them as different because they're part of that secret assassin society. At the same time, you also have kind of the argument that goes into, well, would you, if someone breaks into your house and is stealing your television, would you shoot them over property? And that is, I think is a good example of where this becomes a problem, because it's like, yes, I can acknowledge that a person's life is not, or is more valuable than, say, like a personal possession.
Mm-hmm.
Even some very sentimental and valuable possessions of mine. I'm not talking about a Rolex. I'm talking about something that like may be innocuous to anybody else, but has extreme personal importance. And is that worth their life? Well, I think that's the wrong question, because we're dealing with an issue of justice now. We're dealing with an issue of, well, it's not wrong, it's not right that the person's breaking into your property, and there's a whole other problem. So starting with, this goes back to philosophy as well. Like, we know we've got the system of ethics. We have the study of ethics, which is going to be morals, rights and wrongs, virtues, and so on and so forth. But then we also have metaphysics. And so metaphysics would start to answer the question, what does it mean for a person to be human? Or what is human? And then if we have that definition, if we have that concept, if we were to treat somebody as other than that, wouldn't that then be dehumanizing?
Gotcha. So what do you think is makes someone human then? If we're on the same page.
Yeah, for a background on it, and I guess I have to try to be quick on this, is that I do believe in the biblical account of mankind, as in that mankind was created in the image of God. In fact, I think that is the specific thing that makes humans human. That you could remove, so this answers why, say, someone with severe mental disabilities, maybe their parents were just an absolute alcoholic, and so they've got severe fetal alcohol syndrome. They may not be able to function like a person, so the definition of a human is not defined by their function, but at the same time they're still a person. Or it's also not. So I also begin from that standpoint of to be human means to be created in the image of God, which means they have some specific moral significance in being created, in being intentionally created by what would be then the source of the good, the high, whether it's a hierarchy of values with God at the top, or whether it's our concept of morality is determined by the Creator. That would be that answer. However, and so what I believe a human is going to be a number of like kind of data premises. One, created. They are created. We are intentionally created, so we're not accidental. Two, we're not only were we created intentionally, but with purpose, and that purpose will be to worship God, know Him, love Him, glorify Him, and take joy in that. In other words, God created us for our purpose in creation is to have relationship with the Creator. But then to add another thing to it, it's that we live in a physical world, and we have multiple parts to us, being a mind, a body, and a soul. And I understand that in some philosophical debate, you'll have a question whether or not mind and soul are the same thing. But it's the brain-body complex, not the brain-body problem, but it's the mind
and body.
Mind-body complex.
Yeah.
So then to try to come to a working definition is genus Homo sapien, which is probably not the right scientific term. I'm not a biologist, so don't come after me in that one. But there's a human element that separates us genetically from all other creatures. So we can't blend into something else.
Yeah.
And we've seen where that's gone wrong in history, where people have tried to use various belief systems, or the result of belief systems have created. I think that mankind is also necessarily religious, and I mean that in the modal necessary. Modal term in philosophy what I'm referring to is there's no possible person who is not religious. Their religion is the thing that organizes or participates in that hierarchy of values and determines right and wrong. And so that's another thing that separates mankind from animals, is that animals have instinct, but they don't have morality. And then they have instinct, and they kind of can fit into somewhat of a Darwinistic approach where they're just trying to continue. But mankind is very distinct, where the way that humankind deals with things like suicide or even warfare is, though we might see not paradigms, we might see similar parallels within, say, the natural world, we also are able to determine pretty straightforward that it's distinct. mankind will go to war with other people for reasons other than resource management.
Gotcha.
You know, something like that.
Gotcha.
And so to kind of, as I'm trying to like work this definition into something smaller, mankind, Homo sapien, creating the image of God with capable of a moral comprehension, and is so that. And I know there's going to be a psychopathic question there, and then they exist within both a physical and a moral framework.
Gotcha. I think the key word, like, to focus on is the moral aspect of this. Is like, because you're right, like, no animal really does have a moral code. You know what I mean? Like, that's what, there's animals and humans have that moral code. I think when it comes to the good and evil, like, that's where, like, where it kind of conflicts. You know what I mean? And like in the dehumanization factor, like, because someone's so evil per se, we can essentially take away their moral code if we're dehumanizing them, if that makes sense.
Clarify if you could a little bit. Like, are you saying that by observing someone committing an atrocity, we can consider that we are quick to justify them as less than human?
Yes. So like if we focus on just the moral code of it, morality, if we believe that they are evil or committing evil, then we can dehumanize them and kind of associate them as less than human. So does that make sense? Like,
yeah, I think it's an easy subject for people to jump to. Very, very, like, the 1900s had a lot of very, very large world scaling elements of this. You had World War II, and then you had the communism in Russia and the Holodomor. You had the idea of like the Holocaust.
Yeah.
You had you can read the literature of people who legitimately identified somebody else as less than, not like lower rank in our framework, but like, oh, it's not immoral to kill you because you actually don't hold moral value. In America in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been this talk about like the 3/5 rule for people of different I guess races is the easiest way to say it, but like, how you had slavery and chattel slavery, and you had the buying and selling of people as property, not as, say, like an indentured servitude.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we definitely see it. I think you can also look at it in like even some forms of like petty crime, or even not even petty crime, but like gang level crime, where it's like, we're literally better than you, so it's our right to take it.
Yeah,
or
gotcha.
Holy war, or or what's the caricature that's referred to as holy war. I guess I'll be a little affronting on that one. So
now, but you brought up how like you think dehumanizing with your definition of being human and dehumanizing. You brought up how you not only think it's not necessary, but you think it's weak.
Yeah,
right.
I think I like on a tactical sense, and this is going to shift from the philosophy into the tactical sense. I think when you dehumanize your opponent, you actually set yourself up for failure, because you're no longer treating them like a thinking, acting being. You're treating them like something less. And so I'm not talking about in like an honor code, like warrior code mentality of like honor your opponent and go into battle honorably. I think from a pragmatic approach, it weakens people, because it's like it's essentially trying to produce the result of being a capable soldier who's able to make a decision under the heat of conflict, but instead of actually training them up to become a capable moral agent who's able to act and make decisions in these very, very intense, violent situations, we just give them a cheat code. We just say, well, if we, I think the caricature in this idea of dehumanization actually makes people poorer fighters. Now, an example of this that you could use looking outwards is that various we've seen multiple conflicts in our lives. I'm in my 30s, and the times where I've seen conflicts where one group very distinctly dehumanizes the other group, they tend to become very predictable. They're kind of like you kind of get a you get a predictability to them. Oh well, they're gonna just do this. Or maybe another one is, I think it also can be a little bit lazy. Now that's going to be a moral criticism, but why I think it makes people weak and choosing to go down the route of dehumanization in order to, say, make a fighting force more effective is that you're trying to hack something that actually you're trying to hack or create a simulacrum or a simulacrum, or like you're trying to create something that looks like a soldier who's capable of making decisions in the moment, who's capable of making life or death, right and wrong decisions with great consequence. But instead of actually developing them to be able to do that, you're just giving them that, you're making, I'm going to go back to the idea of like the cheat code of like, well, if we just teach them to dehumanize the enemy, then we don't have to worry about them not pulling the trigger. And that criticism might not land very well because I'm not, say, a general, I'm not a 4-star, I'm not planning that kind of activity, but it goes back to like on the individual basis, the individual in war, holding a rifle, making a decision to raid a building, execute an ambush. If they treat their opponent as less than human, I think what they're doing to themselves is in the immediate, in the tactical, they're setting themselves up for failure because they're essentially not playing with all of the data and information that they have available to them. They're treating their target as something less dangerous than what it is. Yeah.
So you think humans are, if you think of them as a human, we think they're more dangerous than, like, let's say if they were animals, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I do. Because we have more, let's say, avenues of approach, avenues of attack, right? And so like, you can use, what's an example of it? Like we can look at conflict and violence between people. Like if we just view it as sort of instinctual in our opponent, we start moving down the road of thinking that they don't have choice and decision and intellect.
Yeah.
Or they don't have moral conviction or any sort of action there. And then this also closes a major door in the more global scale conflict, which is we recognize that different cultures have different sets of values.
Yeah.
And if we just say, like, and this is going to be my anecdotal experience, I distinctly remember after learning Pashtun and speaking to the Afghanis in the area that when we tried to talk to them about what they're doing, whether selling opium or concealing explosives or whatever was morally wrong, or say like it was undignified, it was like criminal in our language, it didn't mean anything to them. But if you said it was dishonorable, that it was an affront to their character, that's slightly different than just say it's different than just a dignity society. They would respond very differently because they understood you had to appeal to their moral consequences. And so I thought that was a major difference. But if we were just going to say go dehumanize them to say, oh well, they're just sheep herders, or not even that, they're just less than human because they're just barbarians of sorts.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you missed the point. You're going to lose the battle, but that's only part one.
Gotcha.
So the second part, though, that why I think it makes people weak is it creates a short-term solution with a long-term problem. In other words, by engaging in dehumanization, say in the battlefield, the person is opening themselves up to things like what we call PTSD.
Okay.
And this is that second part where I think it makes them weak, is that, and this isn't a criticism of people's character because they did things in the moment. I would want to address it rather more as, I think there is a direct correlation between the conscious involvement of dehumanization and the emotional and mental trauma that comes afterwards. Because I believe, and this is going to be maybe less more on the metaphysics side, that by being created in the image of God, we inherently understand that other people are people too, that they have value. And yet when we dehumanize them, we are essentially creating that cognitive dissonance that eventually it might get us through the moment, but eventually it comes back to haunt, because your conscience is telling you something else, is telling you that no, that even though I needed that at that moment, or thought I needed that at that moment, in order to get through this scenario, this situation, this battle or whatever, the reflection of that and its impact on the psyche, or not even the psyche, but the conscience, results in that dissonance.
Yeah. See, I like how you word it as like weak, like, you know, like as like it's a weak thing to do. Just because, like, I think when it comes to, I always think of scenarios like active shooter, essentially. Like when they're coming up on the door, I mean, there's a lot of factors, as we both know, to it, but I do think that part of that hesitation does come because they do think that there's a human on the other side.
Yeah.
You know,
so when
you're
saying you're talking about, say, like the armed response.
The police officers.
Police officers, in that sense. Yeah. No, I can see that. Yeah.
And like when we go indoors, like there's not a lot of hesitation at all, right? It's very dynamic, and I do think it's because that empowerment that comes from dehumanizing what's on the other side of that door. You know what I mean?
I never really thought of it that way, to be clear, as in, like, I didn't think of the person potentially on the other side of the threshold as less than human. I figured that hesitation was sometimes a result of bad training. You know, like, I'll use that as this is just, I know it's not the intent of the episode or the intent of the conversation, but I think sometimes it can come down to like training scars. Where like you're a private, you're learning how to, you're a private Ranger battalion, you're being taught how to clear a room, and you're literally just getting smoked and yelled at all the time. Because you're trying so hard to do every little thing right that like no one actually teaches you how to do it. And so it becomes very performative. It's like, well, I know what it looks like. I know what right looks like in theory, because I've done 800 glass house drills. But I don't. But my leadership has maybe not communicated to me what right is, what a successful entrance to a building is, in the sense of objectives and tasks, and like I'm trying to say, like, the training scar of like being, as much as it can be a criticism of the individual, like the students not learning how to do it, and so they don't have confidence in how to enter a room because their entire train up has been basically just getting yelled at. Without anyone like pulling them aside and saying, okay, we're going to demonstrate this, we're going to practice it, we're going to do 30 reps. We're going to just enter the doorway 30 times. Okay, tighten this up, improve this. This is bad, this is good. You see where this footwork went wrong. You see what you did with your rifle, instead of like, oh, you came with your rifle down, go do 30 push-ups and hit the wood line. It's like, okay, after a while, some people won't listen. Maybe they need some punishment, but that's a training scar side. But the other side, and this is going back to the police officer entering the school and hesitating at the door. Maybe they're not confident in their skills, or the problem that I think we're dealing with here is like, now's the moment that you have. Is this really the first moment you're thinking? You're mentally concerned about having to actually take a life. Were you checked out? And that goes back to, like, I think that this is where I think that dehumanization actually makes people weak, is because you essentially morally check out of the morality of the question until it's in your face and you have to face it now.
Gotcha.
And so I can dehumanize my enemy through all my training, but when they're actually shooting at me and I'm looking them in the face and I'm thinking I have to do this, that's not the time you want to think about it. It's because you've supplanted a moral system, a framework of justice by which you understand that even though there's tragedy involved in the death of another human being, there's a moral consequence to certain actions. Then you can execute the action without hesitation, even though you know that it is one of moral significance. That's I think maybe that's another illustration of why I think dehumanization specifically makes people weak.
Gotcha.
So
you're looking at it more from the longevity point of it too, in the sense of, if we don't dehumanize but we still perform the job, we'll have more peace later.
I think we'll also be better at it, because the individuals who are on the ground, who have skin in the game, who are in the field, are able to make those decisions because they've been developed in their course to be able to make those decisions, instead of skipping all of that responsibility and reducing it into some sort of check of dehumanization.
Yeah. I said, because our culture really, as you know, I'm just speaking from Ranger Battalion, but like, if you get a kill, it's very much like, nice, like you did it, you know what I mean? Like we're as if like dehumanizing is like part of it, you know what I mean? So I don't know if you experienced that, but
this might be just like an odd way, but I always took it as tongue in cheek. You know, like now what I'm saying about like the, you know, giving the guy like praise for pulling the trigger is, on the one hand, like, you did the thing, like you did your job, you actually, all this training has been fulfilled. That might be one part of it, and then another part of it is like, we survived, you did the right thing. Another element certainly is the, like, you were in mortal combat with somebody and you ended up the victor. Gladiator, you know, you've got all these movies on these things. It's just like, you know, there is that carnal attitude, but then also I think underneath a lot of it too is like, do we believe that what we're doing is right? That, let's say in the situation in Afghanistan, where or you know, a country overseas, where you are taking soldiers from pretty much one of the best militaries in the world, that are in the higher echelon of their skill level, who are in the smaller unit, that have had to prove their value to get there. You know, and then they go to a country where you're fighting a guy in flip-flops with a water bottle. You're like, I mean, it wasn't really a fair fight, was it? Like, because if you lost the gunfight, you got an AC-130 overhead, they're just gonna bomb, you know.
Yeah.
So that becomes an issue, and I think that, but I do think that there's an inherent justice to it as well. So
yeah, I think of the guys that, like, when asked, like, you know, how does it feel? Like, do you feel bad ever about killing? So most of them are like, no, like, they all deserved it, in a sense. Like, how I take that is like, they dehumanize those people. Like, yeah, that life wasn't worth living. But the guys that have the problem are the ones that usually kill and realize after the fact that they're human. If I could point out, I don't want to call anyone out, but Chris Fettis, have you watched his podcast on Sean Ryan?
I did hear, at least when he was talking about the raid where they're looking down into the compound and there were people sleeping under the sheets.
Yeah, yep.
And there was a hostage rescue situation.
Yes, exactly.
And then they ended up eliminating the people there, only to find out that they weren't combatants, and that the hostage had been ferreted out through a rat tunnel.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be pretty, like, I was wrong. But is that different? Is that dehumanization, or is it dealing with the conscience of that he was wrong in his assessment? And this is not intended to be an attack at Chris Fettis either.
Yeah, yes.
It's more like, these are the kinds of questions that we're going to be dealing with in the subject of dehumanization, because I think that a person can successfully go to war, fight their opponent, and kill them, and without dehumanizing them. I do believe that is possible.
Do you think if Chris ever, let's say, kind of moved past that and went on more, not really like taking in what he just did, if he just like passed those bodies and like didn't go back and like looked at them, do you think that he would have the same effect of oh fuck, they were non-combatants, you know what I mean?
If he had never confirmed whether or not they were combatants, would he have?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't really speak on behalf of Chris, because I don't think that I'm not him. And he's not in the room, and I'd love to actually, hear more from him on that one. But I think one correlation to that is it actually comes from Dave Grossman's book on killing. And with all of its, with all of the things in that book, I think one of the useful observations that came from it was how the further the person is from the action, the activity, the less traumatic it appears to be. And so we're talking about like, he uses an example, and I think in our framework it would be like you have two people engaged in a knife fight versus two people engaged in a pistol, like like a Wild West. Versus like two people with rifles at 300 yards shooting at each other.
Sniper rifles,
Versus someone on a joystick clicking a button and dropping a bomb and killing a family of 8. And you're like, well, does the person on the drone, does the drone operator, how does the drone operator respond to it differently when he's clicking on pixels that do have very real world consequences? That's where I think you can start to answer that question. For this situation with Chris is that if he had never verified it, he might have wondered, but it would have been different because it was the shock of realizing it. Because he was right there. He had no opportunity to obfuscate his participation in what just took place.
I say that, I bring that up because I think he did humanize after the fact, right? That verification he needed to know if what he did was justified by humanizing. I was like, oh crap, they weren't non-combatants. But as we both know, like, war is war, and people are going to die whether they're non-combatants or combatants. It's an unfortunate thing. You get like what are those called? What are in Syria we mortared a lot. What are those called? Fire missions. You get those fire missions. You don't really necessarily know, where you hear like one of the fire missions my buddy had was bombing a school. You don't actually know if there's kids or not in there that, you know what I mean? So, I do think like, cause he didn't verify, he didn't give that much thought. You know what I mean?
Or at least it didn't manifest as not the right word. It didn't like boil to the surface at that time. And that again goes back to like how I think about how it affects people in PTSD, particularly the moral side, the moral injury side, not the physiological, the chemical imbalances, the brain damage or whatever. I'm talking more like the moral injury implications of PTSD is it having to come to terms with and separate and close that cognitive dissonance into recognizing that the actions that you partook were not moral, and you chose to do them. At some point in time, you made a deliberate choice. Yeah.
I want to shift gears just a little bit in the dehumanization, like the definition of less human. Why I think it's a little more necessary, because I do believe we make people more human at times. Same way dehumanizing, but now we're kind of putting them on a pedestal.
Okay.
For example, I always bring up Taylor Swift and her Swifties.
Okay.
Like they don't do, like Taylor Swift can't do wrong at all in their eyes.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And when it does, there's always an excuse or something, right? Like, so I do think like people dehumanize in the opposite way too.
They view people as larger than
human,
or larger than their moral code.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that also, though, comically enough, I think it's a combination of I don't think there's a lot of like heavy intellectual approach to it.
Yeah.
I don't think that they're writing a discourse on the moral perfections of.
Yeah.
But then there's also like mankind has been doing this for a long time. Baal worship, Thor, Ragnarok, these kinds of things, or Thor and Odin and the Greeks, and like these kind of like larger than life humans.
Yeah.
You even read it in like some of the contemporary literature today, like Brandon Sanderson, about how like the characters that were presented as gods, spoiler alert, were at one point in time men, potentially, and you're like, oh, okay, so that's odd. Like, people can ascend to a greater status or greater being. Yeah, I can see that.
I think, a lot of young young people do it too, or just everyone in general, in the sense of they dehumanize us, like warriors in the warrior class too. Like especially when we start talking about, you know, personal issues that we had, they're like, oh, that guy had issues. Like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like there's like that pedestal that we're on, like, don't talk about that. You know what I mean? That I feel it should be talked about. It's like, yeah, you're asking a human to go kill other humans. Obviously there's going to be, you know, issues with that in itself, but why should we dehumanize that human for killing other humans, if that makes sense?
Are you referring to sort of the disposability of the veterans? In other words, like we hire, like we as a nation, because we're citizens now. You know, we as a nation, we're dealing with a very large nation, so it's how much like direct influence we have. But we are essentially funding and equipping men to go fight wars on our behalf, and then when they come back, we view them as like broken, so that they no longer have a place in society, or they're objects to be used, like say through a political class. That is this what you're referring to, and how like.
I'm more referring to my younger self before I joined the military, of like dehumanizing in a way of like looking at more than human, of committing the act of taking less than human life, if that makes sense. Like why, and then come back to get like guys at the highest tier having issues, like, whoa, like you know, that's caught me off guard. Like, you know what I mean? So
I mean, I definitely distinctly remember times where we kind of approached anyone who referred to PTSD as being weak and being like, oh, you're just not good enough.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was exactly, in my experience, it was not exactly portrayed on, say, the platoon level. It wasn't like we were coming in after a deployment and hearing that such and such was dealing with this issue, and so we thought, he's just weak, get rid of him. There was some compassion there, but are you saying then from the outside, like people not in that environment who don't have relationship in that place, are dealing with this kind of not shell shock. They're by viewing these people as like larger than life, they're setting them up for failure, because then they're disappointed when it's like, don't meet your heroes kind of thing.
Exactly. Like when they're being vulnerable or something like that, and they're like you were saying, like shocked of like, whoa, like you're dealing with that, like you kind of signed up to do it. You know what I mean? Like you shouldn't, you know. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts to that too that I kind of look at. One of them is just, it's kind of like the man in the arena quote from what is it, the bull moose president.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, whatever. Not
wasn't it Theodore?
It is Theodore Roosevelt. Yeah, you're right. Some of it is just kind of like, if you and I were Rangers, if you come to me and you tell me that I'm being a coward, that's going to mean something to me. It's going to mean something on the level of like an honor society. It's also going to mean something completely different if somebody that I don't know comes off the street and tells me that I'm a coward, or I'm in a class and your activist person comes and says I'm a coward and I'm a baby killer. It's like, I'm sorry, I actually don't care about what you think or if you think, because that is such a leap of dishonesty and disingenuous participation. But if you were to say it to me, there'd be some conviction in it. And so maybe that's kind of the one side of it, where it's like, I can understand that there's criticism coming from certain people, but at some point in time, that person's going to have to realize that their bandwidth for criticism is much shorter than somebody else's.
Yeah.
Straightforward being that example, we were talking about Chris Fettis. If he came into the room right now and he charged me, he said, not charged me like a bull, but charged me, like said, you're being a coward or you're being dishonest about the work that you do, that would mean something very much different. That would mean a lot more to me than say, even especially in the context of this environment, talking about work and warfare, than say someone in a church. Yeah. You know, not because they're less of a person, but the context of the relationship of similar participation activity with someone like Chris Fettis would have a lot heavier weight. I think though where this goes back to one of the issues that where I want to see, where I've observed dehumanization take place is very much so in line with Grossman's observation, where the most egregious cases of dehumanization that I've observed are people who believe that they are immune from the consequences of those actions. They're in the media talking about, you know, those people are less than us, or they're in some sort of position almost caricatured by their isolation from the consequences of their actions. That's where I see it happening the most.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you see like dehumanization is more targeted at groups than individualized, if that makes sense.
I think it's easier for someone who doesn't have to deal with who does not have skin in the game and the consequences of it in that way to dehumanize on the level of groups.
Gotcha.
I also think that I'm also coming back to that act of dehumanization against, say, like people with blue eyes, right? Or you know, whatever, you pick some sort of feature, you know, some feature to view someone as less than. And I'm deliberately trying to stay away from like extremely socially relevant topics on that thing right now.
Yeah.
To kind of give the example of why I think that's a definitional issue, is that when it would have been easier for me, or easier for a soldier, an individual, to engage in the dehumanization of the Afghani population until they have to go and live with them. And work with them and see their life and speak to them and talk to them as people. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that there weren't ample opportunities for people who had constant face-to-face interaction, say, believing they're all liars. They have a different code of conduct when it comes to honesty in that sense. Yeah. Ones that we might actually morally object to, but it's easier to dehumanize. I think I saw more of that dehumanization be sort of trivial and easy to participate in when they didn't have to deal with the consequences of the action. They didn't have to go into the village and meet with the elder and talk to the people.
Gotcha.
So,
do you think the struggle with that, let's bring back law enforcement, because let's go back to the hesitation of the door. They have to deal with the consequences going into that room and having to take the life, you know, that person on the other side having to take that life and then take consequences after, right? Like the follow on. So I do think, so consequences and dehumanization in a way kind of go hand in hand. What do you think?
I think a moral consequence. Okay, so I think that dehumanization is an act of evil. And because we exist in a moral framework, will result in a consequence that will be negative. So what I'm saying is, like, if you cut your finger off, you're going to bleed, right? If you dehumanize somebody, you're going to suffer the consequences, but they're not going to be bleeding. It's going to be something else. Yeah. And I think one example of that is one of the moral injuries that we encounter when we talk about PTSD. That it is the moral consequence of participating in the act of dehumanization.
Gotcha. Yeah, I bring this up, you know, we talked about it because I feel like, you know, to cap it, to have this conversation, dehumanize, because we do it to do our job. Maybe not all of us, right? I did it to do my job. I know a lot of guys that do it for their job, to sleep peacefully. And I guess, Lee, where you're saying that moral injury of like in PTSD, if we know we can turn it on, we can turn it off, and I feel like we need to recognize that. Like, how do we decondition ourselves from dehumanizing for those who have done it? You know what I mean?
How do you take someone who has engaged in the practice of dehumanization for the purpose of, let's call it mental self-preservation? What are ways that someone who's, I'm just gonna make the assumption real quick that, like, it doesn't happen apart from choice. Like, you can't institutionalize that. There has to be some willing participation in it. Yeah. Perhaps a short phrase of it is actually good leadership. I know that's not gonna be, I know that's not an emotionally resolving answer, But part of it would be, I think what you have to do is you have to start resolving the problem. And the problem is that you're shortcutting your way to the action. Okay. You're shortcutting your way to justification. Instead of like, we're going to use kind of the classic movie trope of like the hero, the main character, the protagonist of the story is secret agent man, and he's doing secret agent things, and halfway through the story he discovers that he's actually working for the bad guys, that the bad guys are in his government. Maybe we're the baddies. And then he joins the vigilante crew and fights against his own former, employer and country or organization or whatever, and then like, saves the day basically, right? That trope is a good story, but in the circumstances that we're dealing with in this framework, I think the better example of it is if a person is recognizing that they're using dehumanization as a shortcut, the first start is to stop. You have to stop. You have to cut that off and recognize it as not just ineffective but immoral. Gotcha. And then then you're going to have to go do the work that your leadership and your development should have done, which is develop within you a moral compass. In other words, that you can make decisions. And I hate the word empowering, but this is where it's important here. By developing somebody as capable of making decisions and them acting knowing that they have skin in the game and they're going to make a decision, that's where that comes in. Gotcha. And so it might mean in a case-by-case basis pulling somebody from the conflict zone or from that area and developing that part of them. Developing that, and it's going to require, sometimes it's going to be a peer-to-peer opportunity, and sometimes it should be a leadership opportunity. Where if you're a leader and you're not leading your men and women to become characters who can make decisions, if you're just micromanaging them, you are as a leader setting them up for failure. Yeah 100%.
That makes sense. Let's dive in a little bit about what I say, lack of better terms, the brainwashing we experienced at Ranger Regiment. Like you said, tongue-in-cheek it, like the type of conversations and like how we talk to each other essentially on doing the job, and how we, for my case, would be ISIS at the time. So how did you, the way that we talked, the way, all that, how did you not let that not affect your moral code, and not dehumanizing people? Because it's very hard, like looking at it, and it's very hard to not be like, yeah, screw those guys,
So my own personal experience is going to differ a little bit from maybe the mechanism here, but I think for me, I'm not trying to say this is like I'm a better than, I was undergoing such a cultural shock from where I grew up in, because the environment that I grew up in was very different than a military environment. Like I grew up in rural Midwest, church going, didn't drink, didn't swear, didn't smoke, like all these kind of things. I grew up in a very, what people at that time would refer to as sheltered, but fine, so be it, right? But there was a major culture shock going on. The major difference between where I was coming from, and like that just wasn't I just took it as very, like, again, tongue-in-cheek. Like, it was kind of like a joking thing. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't really think that the Afghanis are less than people. I wish that we had been given a better description, maybe a better road to war on how we had gotten there. Like, you don't need to explain to me why Osama bin Laden was a bad dude, especially when he was instrumental in the Twin Towers. Yeah. But it would have been really helpful to know more about why in 2010 we were fighting against the Haqqani network and how they were affiliated with this group or how they were facilitating this thing. And that came out that came out in that frustration when we would go in for like an op brief, and we'd be going after a facilitator, which is just like, we're going after a generic bad guy. You know, you're like, okay, well, what is he doing? Not saying that we're the world police or we should be operating in the world police, but like, where does this piece fit in the puzzle? Yeah. Because in that sense, like, our job in the military was very much so a direct action position. Every day, every month, when we were training basically just to do a raid. Yeah. And the purpose of a raid is to go into somebody's house, kill or capture them, secure material, or secure of something of importance, like a WMD or something like that, and then get out. So we're not there to police. We're not there to figure out whether or not the person in the house is beating his wife. We're not there to figure out if he's paying his taxes. We're raiding his house to kill or capture him, take information relating to the network he's a part of, and then or take certain material that he has. Yeah. You know, to raid that, to remove that possibility or that capability from an opposing force. So the dehumanization in, say, in the cages where we're just chattering, I don't remember that very much. Really? I just don't. I remember it, actually, the place that I remembered it happening the most was, again, in like somewhere like basic training. Oh. But it was at the same time, I guess, in my own mind, like, funny? Oh. Not funny like funny like a joke with poor taste. Like, that's kind of funny. Yeah, or whatever, dude. Gotcha. Whereas, and I think some of that came from understanding that there's a moral justification for the use of force. That it's not peace and prosperity and everyone getting along, or just dehumanization. That there are just causes for warfare. And so, yeah, I maybe I didn't struggle as much with the justifications for it. But it was strange that we spent so little time, even in a direct operation unit, addressing the intelligence and the information and the types of conflicts that we were going to deal with, and where that fit in the greater picture. And that's where I think it came out. We're like, did we really were we settling a grudge? Did Afghani A give us human intelligence information referring to Afghani B, saying that he was a bad guy working with bad guys, and so then we go raid B so that A can take his property? Yeah. You know, like, are we settling grievances? Are we doing that, or is there some sort of justice? And I had to read up on that later. Gotcha. I'm not trying to say this is a moral failing of my leadership. But I think that's a direction of where, like, you treat your soldiers, especially your guys who have gone the next level to volunteer for Ranger Battalion, you should treat them like adults. Yeah. Where they're like, hey, this is what we're dealing with. This is the network that we're gonna go. We're scheduled to deploy against. This is their affiliation with these organizations. Yeah. And how that contributes to the war effort as a whole. I think we have the ability to do that now. Yeah. That was definitely not talked about nearly as much as it should have been, for sure. I bring it up, right, because when we had those conversations, especially as a young, like, 18, 19-year-old, I'm looking up to these guys, and when they're talking about people like that, like, it's very influential to me. Like, oh, that's how I have to think. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, okay, so, I mean, he's the epitome of a Ranger. That's how he thinks about who we're fighting against. That's how I have to think to go combat that. Yeah, that makes sense. Did you have a good relationship with your first team leader? No, I did not. Did you have a good relationship with any of your team leaders? No, but I will say I respected all of them. Okay, yeah, I think that's a very common. I don't know if I'm not going to say it's a very common outlook, but like, being able to respect the position of the team leader, even though not looking up to them. Yeah, I think that's where we were starting to deal with kind of like that dissonance of like, I actually, as a young man of 18, 19, 20, want to look up to my team leader as not only someone who can teach me how to win a gunfight, but who's someone who's also going to help me develop me as an individual. Yeah. And where I think, if we're going to go back in our conversation, it might be a little inappropriate to put that weight of responsibility on, as we look at now, your team leader was 20 years old or 21 years old. Yeah. Like, we had a squad leader who had like 5 deployments who was 23. Yeah. So.
yeah, I think just how much we're influenced in that culture really, affects that mindset. But at the end of the day, we all wanted to be there, like that 3-time volunteer mindset. I do think like having that personal development talk of like everyone, just kind of checking in. I feel like, especially after target or just doing something strenuous, even after like freaking MLAT, a check-in from there. I think that would help a lot in the sense of doing the job and essentially what we're all signing up to do, which is go kill someone.
Yep.
Dehumanizing or not, we all signed up to do that.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So I think that like leadership wise, and maybe they haven't done it or whatever, so you can't really hold them, but having that open conversation about it, I think in a healthy manner, right?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I recognize within the institution that is the U.S. Army, like that's asking something of somebody that they didn't necessarily sign up for. Like asking someone who signed up to be a ranger and they go through and they become a team leader and expecting them to be like a pseudo father figure for a 19-year-old kid. Yeah. Is not really what they signed up to do.
That's fair. Yeah.
And it's a heavy task, but heavy is the crown. Like if you're going to have to, we can expect more out of each other. While also looking at somebody who's bringing on expectations from, say, outside the organization, say, hey, this is not your place to speak. And again, that's just going to be an institutional problem of like, hey, we want to have checks and balances so that we don't have rogue operators going out and committing war crimes.
Yeah.
Yes. But but at the same time, not everyone's criticism comes out of a genuine intent. I think sometimes it's just jealousy or bitterness or like.
Yeah.
And you got to be able to let that go.
That's true. Yeah. Everyone has their first team leader story for sure. And I think that's important too, because it sets the tone for the rest of your time, I think, at least as a private.
Yeah. No, it definitely does. I still remember the first words my team leader said to me, and it was, "Boy, do you hate rednecks." That's the first thing that he ever said to me was, "Do you hate rednecks?" And I'm like, I'm expecting literally anything else. What's your PT score?
Yeah.
Are you,
what's the definition of a battle drill?
Yeah, like what's your PT score in basic training, or like what's your 1 mile or your 5 mile run time, like, or like how many points did you find in land nav during cold range? And I was like, no, do you hate rednecks? And I'm like, I think I remember the answer I gave too, which was, I think rednecks means something different where you're from than where I'm from.
Yeah.
And so his answer was do push-ups. I was like,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, Roger.
Yeah.
Roger's fine.
So,
no.
It is funny though.
Yeah, going back to dehumanization, like we talked about it offline, but I feel like truly, genuinely having this conversation will just do defining it and like realizing if you need it or not. I feel like you do, you feel like you don't. Maybe that changes, but these are conversations that need to happen before that private steps on target, before that law enforcement goes up to that room. You know what I mean?
I absolutely think these questions are ones that have to happen. Like, and sometimes they can happen in like the advantage of having the community is that the older characters can shepherd and help shape the younger characters.
Exactly.
For sure. But even then, if you're not in that environment, and let's pull out of military and law enforcement and just talk about like justified use of force and self-defense, right? If you're there's a big difference between, say, shooting somebody who's robbing you or threatening to kill your family or whatever, and then, well, that's not a big difference. It's just like, it's if I'm going to use force, if I'm going to carry a gun to defend myself, if I'm going to learn, we talk about this all the time in the gun culture. There's this constant harping on, if you're going to carry it, know how to use it.
Yeah.
Like we actively chide and maybe to some extent mock people who wear the clothes and dress the part but can't do the thing.
Yeah.
You know, but ultimately, like, that moral consequence of, if you're going to carry a firearm for the defense of your family and you don't know how to use it, and you're not at least moderately proficient, and yes, there's a gray area on what is proficient enough to fit the moral quality.
Yeah.
But at the same, but they're like, but if you're also going to carry a tool for the use of self-defense and you've not considered the moral implications of the use of force, then you are setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
Especially whether it's going to be in the form of hesitation at the door. I'm scared, or I don't know what to do. Let's take this. You know, that there was the when you're in a mall and there's an active shooter or something like that, or you're we're gonna use a mall thing, right? Or you're in your congregation at church and there's an active shooter.
Yeah.
That's not the moment you want to start thinking about, oh no, how do I use the safety on my gun?
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
did I load my magazine today? Or did I blah 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 blah? These are all hyperbolic examples. But you also don't want to be in that situation where you have to resort to basically rage in order to make your way through it.
Exactly.
Because that is that, like, you know, that I'm not saying rage and that's like it doesn't have its own strength and value, but it's like it does the same thing. If I'm going to carry a firearm for the defense of my family, I do not want to be considering the moral implications of the use of force at the exact moment when I have to be using it.
Yeah.
I should have taken on that responsibility. I was already, that we're going to talk about moral ethics now.
Yeah.
And philosophy. By making that decision, you wear that mantle of responsibility. You accept that responsibility.
Yeah.
But then if you refuse to live up to the responsibility that you have accepted, there is another moral implication there, which is why when someone like you and I, we're going to again go back into a very straightforward framework where someone like you and I, when we go on a deployment stage and we run from combat, we get into a tick, troops in contact, and I curl up into a ball and cry and hide in the corner. There's something very different than, say, if you took my wife and put her in my position, and that's exactly what she did. Because I volunteered to be there, she didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
And so and you cannot get to a state of being able to make that moral decision without doing the work ahead of time. And sometimes it's introspective, but it can also be aided by community.
Yeah.
By participation in conversation.
Yeah. It's like it brings up, like, you're talking about not being careless here when you're handling the gun, but also being careless up here.
Yep.
You know, I think those are hard conversations that need to be tackled earlier. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, but I appreciate this conversation because I think I don't know. I love seeing different perspectives, especially with your background, with our background of like of being there and done that, and how we kind of navigated through that, you know? So no, I appreciate you, Forrest.
Good. I appreciate you too. It's been good. Yeah, okay, so this is going to be, we recorded that first section for something that you're working on in school right now, and you're working your way through a degree in psychology.
Yep. Minor in philosophy.
Yep, minor. Sorry, man after my own heart. Yeah, so what are some of the things that you found, like, when you study psychology and you look at the two different things, what are some of the things that you've seen, particularly in the way that they talk about psychology, that has demystified a lot of the stuff that we talk about, whether it comes to like PTSD or like, say, anything of that sort? Because I found personally, I continuously run into the problem of, like, pop psychology is basically like diet religion. Okay. It's kind of like it really is, like, it's like asserting moral thesis arguments into somewhere without any grounds upon which to do it, and then also inserting a worldview and a framework of metaphysics without, like, kind of not necessarily justifying itself, but it's just kind of like, oh, Well, you're broken, but we don't know what healthy looks like. How does that work?
Yeah, so I'll start off saying like I'm on my first year of college, so I'm very new at this when it comes to studying psychology. I will say it makes it more real for me, like those mental conditions, and talking about them, like, oh wow, like that's what I do. At least I try to link it to whether what I've experienced or what my friends have experienced. So, like we talked about in my first psychology class, the bystander effect. Have you heard of that?
I think I have, but I think I've heard of two different versions of it. So give it to me.
Okay, so the bystander effect is like, let's say someone needs help and people are like, someone else will take care of it. Like a lot of people will walk by this person and not even do anything about it because they think someone else is going to help. Yeah. In reality, no one's going to help. Like,
if everyone thinks that way, no one will act.
Yeah, like if let's say I'm in a busy apartment complex, I hear like gunshots going off. You know, some of those people aren't going to call 911 because they think other people are going to call 911. So like, kind of like they dilute. I bring that up because I have an account of that, of like firsthand account. Like it was no joke. Like this happened, and then we talked about the bystander effect, and it just clicked. So at my college, there was a stabbing there. And
it's like
yeah, it happened right. The person was actually in my class prior. Like this was in like a 15-minute passing period.
Oh dear.
And I go over, like I'm seeing these crowd of people. This like a good amount of people just like circling around this person, and I'm hearing this person like kind of moan and groan. I'm like, what the heck? I thought it was like a school project. I was like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, what's going on? Yeah, just curiosity killed the cat. And I go up and I see a person laying down, and I look to my right. I was like, what happened to someone random? They're like, oh no. I'm like, you fucking okay. So I go closer to, and I see like she's bleeding on her arm and in the stomach, like she's holding her stomach, and there's one person out of all these people just like helping her, and like everyone else is recording or like doing like that type of deal. And I looked and I was like, what? To this person near her, I'm like, what happened? And it's like, she got stabbed. And I was like, oh, I got a medical kit in my car, I'll be right back. And I'm like running, right? And grab a medical kit. Over there, by then one of the students that responded was EMT. It was about a minute. And I was like, hey, here's a tourniquet. Thankfully she didn't get stabbed. Like it wasn't any arterial bleed or anything like crazy like that. But the fact that I saw that bystander effect just made me, it just put everything, like it's real. Like what we deal with, like mentally, it's real. Whether we want to dismiss it or not, like so, you know what I mean. So yeah, it's very, there's a lot more to it, but yeah. So I hope that answers your question. So
it kind of does, because I'm curious on it. I'm not just curious, like so we make distinctions between, like, say, the utility of a thing and the morality of a thing, and we might make a distinction between, say, people are prone to the bystander effect because of urbanization, right? There's thousands of people around, everyone has a cell phone, so they're going to record it, but like, okay, but no one's actually going to help it.
Yeah, no one's doing anything. Yeah.
But there's also like I'm familiar with what you're talking about now, in the sense that there's also like the moral implication of it, where we would look at somebody who, say, is law enforcement, who falls under who succumbs to the bystander effect as not good at their job, maybe even not a good person.
Yeah.
Whereas if, again, any other random student, it's like, well, I'm not a medic, I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, but do something.
Yeah, something's better than nothing.
Yeah, and in our environment, from even coming from like Ranger Battalion, I do think that's one thing that does stand out in that environment, is that there are people that solve problems, and then there are people that observe problems. There are people that you're like, as a private or even as a soldier in that environment, like, you're not expected to know the answer, you're expected to try to solve it.
Yeah.
And maybe not expected is the right way of saying it. So I think that I'm trying to I'm trying to organize like the moral implication of the bystander effect. Yeah. Sure. Habitually in an urbanized environment, I'm not going to call 911. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't.
Yeah. Right.
Or maybe I'm obligated to. Mm-hmm. But not legally. I am morally obligated.
Yeah.
But not legally. So.
Yeah. I do think people like try to dodge that responsibility by also wanting to be there. Like, oh, like those kids or those people could say they were there for it, but they didn't necessarily help. Just because you're there doesn't, you know. So I do think, like, you know, we sua sponte a lot, you know, and help out where we can. I do think we're programmed with that. But yeah, well, I got into psychology. I know you didn't ask this, but I think I give context here because I feel like there's a need, especially amongst the veteran community. It's two reasons. The big reason is I think it takes a warrior to let another warrior's shield down, to actually go through and talk about it, and not like go and go to someone random that are really good at listening, but they haven't been there. You know what I mean? And that's what really drives me, is because I want to help. I want to help in that light of guys like us that may have been struggling, or are struggling, and don't feel comfortable to talk about it to someone that hasn't been there. You know?
I mean, we could understand the caricature a little bit of, like, you got a guy who's spent 20 years at war sitting down with a 23-year-old recent college grad who's a psychologist.
Yeah.
And she's, you know, she went to, like, what am I going to say to you? I've been at war longer than you've been alive.
Yeah.
Thing. You know, it's like, I don't know, I can understand why that's difficult. Are you seeing other veterans in that area? Is it a rather larger, even though you've only been in the program for a little while, are you already able to make connections between other military people who are in that field, or does it feel very new?
Do I think like there's other veterans doing the same thing? No,
not because we know that there has to be. I mean, I think it's a fair bet to assume that there is, but have you been able to already, even in your small environment, point them out?
Like the people, you know, that I want to help, or
no,
sorry,
no, more like, are there more people like you? Like, are you seeing other veterans in your arena, or is it like I'm the only one in my class?
Honestly, just at where I'm at ASU, I'm not on the main campus, but I'm the only one that veteran wise pursuing psychology to help. That's the goal, because if I figure out I'm just letting you know, if I figure out you're a veteran on campus, I'm gonna talk to you, just because I just love that community. I feel like we're, you know, we're all dealing with it, you know what I mean? So no, and that I will say, the culture shock, I don't know how you felt with this, but the culture shock of college after the military is kind of crazy.
It was kind of funny. It was kind of funny. Yeah. You're like, wow. I remember going back to college and, like, wondering why there were high schoolers around. And they're like, these are your peers. Like, what do you mean? Yeah. You can't even grow a beard. I can barely grow a beard, but I can do better than that. Yeah. You know, that kind of stuff.
And you know, we're viewed as like the old men or the old people in the class, and you're like, man, I don't feel old. Like,
I'm 25. I'm not old. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. So I think that's definitely like something that catches people off guard. It caught me off guard. I was like, man, when I was 18, my 18-year-old experience was a lot different than yours.
Exactly. And you're like, wow.
But I learned to like respect that in the sense, like, wow, these people are freaking smart. Like, I was like, because I could not do that at 18 years old, because I just wanted to, be a ranger. And so I give nothing but respect for those 18-year-olds pursuing college, whether they want to be there or not. I'm just like, dude, like, it's tough. Like, it's tough to like fully dedicate yourself. I think anyway. It's my TBI brain.
It's a TBI brain. Yeah, I think there was a period of time where I definitely approached it as like, you don't even want to be here. You're a weak student, and you're like, okay, dude, like you don't need. She's a communications major. Let her go.
Yeah, and then they look at you like, I don't know if you experience this, like, not only the old man, but like they're like, whoa, dude, like. Or you get some of those people like, I don't care.
Plenty of that.
Yeah,
plenty of that. I did find going back to college after the military better, because like I already was used to having a regimented schedule.
Oh, nice.
So like I was never late on homework.
Nice,
I was never late on anything. Because I was like, oh cool. Like they'd be like, oh, you have to do all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, all right, cool. So I'll block off the time and I'll just do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Now what?
Yeah.
And then and like, as simple as it was, like I remember talking to a student who was like having a hard time getting good grades, and I was like, well, like when do you do your homework? And I'm like, oh, I always turn in last minute. I'm like, I know, but like, what do you do? Like, do you have a job? No. Do you have a car? No. So you live on campus? Yes. Do you play any sports? No. Okay, so like you literally have 4 classes and nothing else in your life.
Yeah.
Like, you have days of time to get this done. What are you doing? Oh, playing video games or whatever. Insert your thing, and it's just like, and like that concept never even dawned on me of like, oh, I can push this off.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, cool. I've got a paper due for this semester. I have a paper due at the end of the semester. It'll be done by the midterm. And so that just the rest of the semester I'm just editing it with the other stuff that I'm reading, and so that I'm like, okay, cool, like, when did you have your paper done? A week ahead of time. And they're just like, I'm like, it's a 5-page paper, it's not that hard. And of course then you go, I'm 25, shoot, I should probably not be this way. So it's definitely interesting. It's humbling too. Thank God they make me feel so old, which I'm not, dude. Like, I'm 27. I'm not old.
But they're like, you're a dad? I'm like, whoa. Like, why you make it sound like that? Like,
ew, gross.
No, it's I will say if I waited 5 years to go to school when I got out to actually sign up. And I'm so, in a sense, I'm glad I did, because I did it when I was ready, because if I did it when I was fresh out, when I was at my height of like sadness or whatever, like I would have not have, it wouldn't have been the same. I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much as I do now. So that there time spent doing some of that hard work before you went to school was worth it. Yeah. Good. Yeah. I think it makes me work harder too, because I didn't know much about the, TBI. I was very ignorant to PTSD, like all that stuff. So going to school and that being my main focus, I was like, this is my objective. Like, it makes you just work harder. It makes you just like, you went to school for philosophy. Like, it's like you had your objective, like from start to finish, and I'm sure when you got that degree, it was like very all that gratification.
Interestingly enough, well, that might have to be a topic for another time, because like one of the things, I wonder if there's anybody else out there who has anything on this, but like I've found repeatedly that immediately following or at the point of graduation, I become depressed.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, like it happened in RIP. When I graduated RIP, it's like, okay, I'm going to 375, not exactly where I wanted to be.
I would be depressed too, if I'm being honest.
Man, more of Georgia. Dang. I mean, it was rough, but at the same time, like, okay, little boy, stop being so arrogant. It's going to be good for you, kind of thing, right? So Georgia was rough, but then, like, I remember graduating Ranger School, and I was like,
yeah.
I wasn't like, I was kind of selfish about it. But at the same time, it was like, oh, okay, now what? Like, And then I remember graduating college, and I'm like, depressed. Just like immediately, like, oh, now I don't have anything to like strive for. I don't have anything to pursue. What do I do now?
Yeah.
And and that not necessarily the rat race, but it was like not having a meaningful task in front of me right away. Like I could have applied for a master's program. I could have pursued all of that. But what ended up starting is kind of like a year, because I was 28 at the time. Instead of taking a year, we're going to take a year off and just kind of like balance finances and figure out where we're going and kind of make what do you call it, a decision on where to go next.
Yeah.
I didn't apply for a master's program that year. I was thinking about going to law. I got ready for the law test. I ended up getting ready for the LSATs. And then I started meeting with lawyers, and like it was to see what their life was like, and I didn't like it, and I didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
Maybe I probably met the wrong ones. You know, it's like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have been so arrogant. Maybe I was using that as an excuse to avoid the responsibilities. But then it was just like, I don't have anything to strive for. I don't have anything to like chase after now, and that was hard.
Gotcha.
So that also required years of like kind of putting that away. And recognizing that like you're not merely defined by your ambition. But that's graduating was like, okay, I'm happy that I did it, but I kind of expected it to be harder.
Gotcha.
I had a repeating error of placing a burden of responsibility on a course, on a selection process, on ranger school, on something like that, of like being a rite of passage.
Gotcha.
That if I do this, now I'm a real boy.
Yeah.
And they never could deliver that because they can't. You can't really do that. Or maybe I'm the broken toy in that example, but I remember always sitting on the graduation floor for all of these different things and being like, not saying that it wasn't difficult. There were hardships to be done. There aren't things that I look back and say, wow, I did that. I'm proud of that. But there was this I was expecting it to provide some element of fulfillment that was almost like defining now.
Interesting.
And it never delivered. You can't deliver in that way.
Well, let me ask you this. Why did you go to college? Why did you use your GI Bill and go to college?
I assumed that I was going to sort of exit the life of anything military adjacent and leave all of that behind and go into some form of a profession. No, I didn't. I got, degrees that are not exactly like engineering or whatever, but I kind of, at the time I had this idea that I was going to go and I was going to start writing.
Gotcha.
And it's not that I don't write, it's just that it's not as easy as people make it out to be.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying it's easy. It's not about easiness. It's like writing has become more of like, how do I say it? Like, I can actually recognize that I'm genuinely afraid that what I write will not be accepted.
Gotcha.
Not that I can't write. I know that I can write. But it's just like, oh, no one will read it. The only thing more scathing than condescension is indifference. And if a fellow or writer comes back and responds to me in good faith and says, or another veteran or whatever says, hey, this is what you did here. That's one thing, but like indifference. Oh, no one cares about your book. That is like a fear.
Gotcha.
Almost paralyzing at times, something to run away from, and I need to stop. But
are you looking like for? Sounds like an acceptance thing. Like you're or recognition.
There's a recognition element to it for sure.
Yeah.
Like there's almost like the old issue with the sophists of like I wrestle with, do I want to be thought of as wise or do I want to actually be wise?
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing their commentary, not my own thought, but like, oh, which is more important to you, to be thought of as a writer or to actually be a writer?
Gotcha. Well, I'll say just off what I read on your posts on Instagram, you're a good writer. So
I got the words. So I'm gonna post words on a platform that is almost exclusively driven by media and pictures, and hope somebody reads it. Wow, not a great business plan, Batman.
For me, at least I've noticed this in my year they told us, because I went to like a veteran thing beforehand, like, hey, veterans, like, go to this kind of like your orientation to college.
You had a veteran specific orientation?
Yeah,
Dude,
yeah.
that's fantastic. I was getting like told that I have to go do a community service project with a bunch of kids, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going home. And they're like, they just looked at me like I was crazy. Like, but you have to like go play ultimate frisbee with us, and I'm like, no, I'm literally going home.
That sounds horrible. Yeah.
I'm like, no,
I've had my mandatory fun.
Yeah. It's like, what am I gonna do? Like throw a frisbee? I'm gonna break her arm.
Yeah, they're like they tell us like, don't be that veteran that tells everyone that you're a veteran. And in my head, I'm like, screw that, dude. Own that part of you. And not only that, what college has done for me so far, like I mentioned earlier, like I try to link it to my servant and get peace with it a lot. And whether that's looking at some 18-year-old kid's perspective on government, or I'm just like, wow, just to think that like I was doing something else at 18, or something like that. I just try to link it and just get peace on that part of me. And that's what I would, anyone that's struggling to go to school or struggling in school, I would definitely like look at it that like, and try to like make peace of why you're there, and link it to what you've done, you know.
I think you can really tell the difference between a student who has like a vision and a direction than a student who's just coasting their way.
Yeah.
And that doesn't need to be a moral condemnation. That doesn't need to be a moral criticism. I think sometimes that is one. Like, I remember being in school just begging in my head for like one of the professors to like pull me into his office and just go line by line through something that I wrote, and like, like, hey, this is what you wrote, this is your argument. But like, I remember just begging for a professor to just take the time to be like, hey, this is the route you're going, and here's like, you might want to look at applying at this school, or working in this direction, or not saying that, not just the recognition part of it, but like, I didn't need another cheerleader. I didn't need a professor that was going to tell me that my grammar's okay. Because I mean, that's important, but like, at that time I'd written enough that my grammar was pretty easy for at least like a college grade level, like an undergraduate level. Yeah. But at the same time, it was like I was really hungry for a professor who'd sit down and be like, okay, cool. So you're writing on first order logic, but this is really a second order logic. You're going to be able to describe it better here. So this is how this works, and this is how you do it in this way. I'm like, okay. Gotcha. So, yeah. And then, of course, there were ones that came around and did that. They're like, hey, you really need to read this book because I read your paper. I think you have something useful here. You should read this one. And then I just never read it.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm like, oh, man, I'm that guy now.
Yeah. Did you ever, like, have panic attacks or anything in college? No. I had mine recently. Okay. I was just crashing out, man. Just crashing out? I was doing math. I told myself, if I can get through like the general ed class, like the all the prerequisites before going towards your major, I can pass college. Because like I think that's we always talk about we talk about gut checks and whatnot. I think the first year in college is my gut check internally, just because it's doing something I really don't care about. Like no one cares about pre-calculus. I'm a psychology major. I don't care about trigonometry, man. Like I don't, or biology. So I think some of the reasons why I didn't do that though is because like I grew up in a very fortunate environment. Like, okay. Where, or let's just call it, like, if you want to use the word privilege, that's fine. But like I grew up, I'm already sort of predisposed to being pretty decent at academics. Okay. But then like I was homeschooled. And so I never dealt with like the high school lack of attention. I'm not talking about like your social life. It's just like, oh no, someone knew when I wasn't doing my work, And then also, I had done some college before I left for the military. So I started when I was younger. I got a lot of those generals done. Nice. So they got, like, Minnesota had a program called PSEO at the time, where a student that was in their junior or senior year of high school could attend at like a college. Okay. And they could attend a college, and that class would count for both their high school and their college. Oh, nice. Yeah. They had that at my high school, but my brain at times like, I'm joining the army. I don't need college. You know what I mean? Like I don't.
And I didn't, and I really didn't decide and commit to joining the army until about halfway through in my senior year.
Oh, gotcha. Gotcha.
Like no one, my family wasn't surprised in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, nice. Okay.
They were like, my parents were kind of like, yeah, we kind of expected that.
Yeah.
But I was like 150 pounds, like played
Dang.
music. I was this little noodly guy. You know, they're just like, oh, you know, this little farm boy, you know,
Yeah.
little noodly farm boy from Minnesota, just like, hi, Roger.
Did you gain weight in basic, by the way?
Dude, yes, I
3
did.
meals a day, dude.
No, I didn't even have to eat extra. I like when I got to basic training, I could do 25 push-ups.
Oh, wow.
I think it might have been even 24. Like,
How did you get in?
Like I could do like 20. I could barely do 30.
Did you have an option 40 contract?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
did.
And they...
They didn't ever PT test me. So.
Oh, okay.
But like I was a good runner, so like you know one versus the other, and it's just like, very clearly like this guy was never like a gym dude. By the time I graduated basic training, I had the second highest PT score in the company.
Nice.
Because it was just like okay, why? Honestly, dude, because I just did the thing.
Yeah.
Your body's like, oh, you've never worked out really any meaningful way in your life. Now it's time to consume all the protein, and I just kind of like. I gained like 25 pounds, and I was
No
just
way.
Like, I probably gained 20 pounds. Yeah, 20 pounds of just muscle and like,
Yeah.
little shaped head force. Like, oh.
Oh, I gained about 15 pounds because I got introduced to 3 meals a day. Okay. I was in shape, but I was like not in army shape. I'll tell you what, dude.
No.
That was.
That is what it is. So, nope, good stories. Well. Let's wrap this up. John, are you active in any way on social media, or is there anything that we can add for you?
Yeah, I mean, I only do Instagram because I feel like that's just everything else is kind of white noise for me. I like Instagram because I like to think my daughter would look back and see me at that time. So my handle is JohnnyHG80. I like just talking to everyone and getting to know you. So, but I appreciate you.
Well, hey,
Appreciate
we'll see each other around. Maybe we'll get out to get shooting here sometime soon. Anyway,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, dude.
Well, with that, this has been the Redacted Culture Cast. This is a kind of a 1.5 part interview because we got to work with John here on psychology. So thanks for listening through with us, and go forth and conquer.